Hi, Peter Charles here, Hooked for Life Fly Fishing. And today we're going to do something a little different. About 11 years ago, I started doing videos in a studio. And my equipment was rudimentary, my skills were rudimentary, and I did a bunch of my own patterns. I tied up a whole bunch of them. And, I've never been totally satisfied with those videos, but I thought, you know what? Why don't I redo that half dozen or so early videos and give you a better quality representation of what those flies are about and how they're tied. And I think the cool thing about that is that these videos, these flies are actually very effective, especially the one we're doing today called the B&C Thingy. It got its name when I was on the water. I was catching fish with it, and one of my buddies saw me getting one after the other, and he yelled out, "What are you using?" And I said, "It's an old tube fly of mine that I put together." And he said, "What do you call it?" "I don't know. It's a black and chartreuse thingy." So it became the B&C Thingy. So let's get started and look at the material. Okay, off the bat, I've got a 2-inch copper tube. You could use aluminum, you could use brass as well, or you could use plastic, depending on the sink rate you wanted. It's 3/32 of an inch in diameter, and I prefer the narrow diameter tubes. It gets a cleaner looking fly, I think. In terms of thread, we're going to be using a nice bright chartreuse, which I'm going to do most of the fly with, but then I'll finish it off with some 3/0 black, just to give it a black head. You could use a magic marker for that on the chartreuse as well. That's quite doable, but I'm going to put some 3/0 on top of it. The tag is going to be this mylar. It's the large mylar. We're going to use the gold side. The rib is going to be this medium uni-French in gold. The body is this fluorescent Antron yarn, and use fluorescent colors wherever possible. It helps this thing to glow, especially on an overcast day. We're going to use a hackle of fluorescent chartreuse marabou, and then we're going to put a collar of this guinea. I've already stripped it on one side. You don't have to strip it on one side. If you want a bulkier look, you can use the entire feather if you like. I'm going to do this one with only half. I want it to penetrate a little bit better. The flash is going to be this black Flashaboo. You could use black crystal flash. In the original one I used black crystal flash, but I've gone and used all mine up, so I don't have any. And the wing is going to be black bucktail. That's what we're going to finish off with. So let's get started. I'm going to start right at the beginning here. Now, when you've got a dark tube like this, you want to make sure this tube is well covered with the chartreuse thread, because when you put this Antron on, it's going to show through if you're not well covered, so you'll see the copper showing through once it gets wet. Okay, now I'm going to put the tag on, the rib, and the body all in one go. I'll put that on top, and if you've seen my video on having your tube flies ride level, there's a strong reason for putting them on top. If you put it underneath, your fly will roll over. So always put your tags on top, and you actually make it like a keel on the body of the tube fly. Okay, now for the rib. And now for the Antron. You grab all three of them together and you wrap it back. Okay, leave about 1/4 inch. That's where we're going to wrap our tag. Now I'm just going to bring the rib and the Antron forward, and I'll just put a couple of temporary wraps in there just to hold them out of the way. Now we'll put in our tag, wrap forward, I should say wrap back, then wrap forward. Put on nice and tight. Okay, when you get to the end, undo those 2 wraps. Bring it all on top. Now wrap this forward. Let's trim off the rest of that antron. Just put a half hitch in here. Put a couple in just to keep it in its place, so we can use the rotary feature here. And I'll get my rib out of the way. And now I'll put my first turn of antron in nice and tight. Get a nice even coverage. Trim that off. A few extra wraps. Get another half hitch. Now we do our rib. If you want, use some hackle pliers just to help hold on to it. Sometimes these can be slippery. Put in a turn, and I'm counterwinding. Trim off. Okay, now we put on our marabou. Just strip some feathers back, barbs back away from the tip. Tie in the tip. I always fold the tip over. And just put in half hitch. Now grab your hackle pliers. Careful, the tips are thin and easily broken. So I usually make the first wind without trying to fold them back, and then I start folding back afterwards. Once I get into the thicker part of the quill. And if there's any strays going forward, we can fix that afterwards. Trim that off, and then we'll just clean this up. I always put a few wraps at the back here, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to start wrapping my guinea right at that point. I want this guinea to help flare out the marabou. So when you have this guinea on and goes through the water, it's relatively stiff. So as it pushes water, it causes the marabou to fluff out. And we'll just tie that in place. Give that tip a wrap back. And you can leave it there if you want. You can cut it out or leave it there. Okay, I'll just put a half hitch in here. Again, fold them back. Now, unlike when you're tying nice pretty flies, I don't like to have a little tiny head on tube flies. I want a big head that's going to push water, cause the materials to move. So you can see that I've got a bulky head here, and I'm going to take off the green now and move to the black. I'll continue with the black, and we're going to end up with a nice big fat head that's going to really push water. I know a lot of people say big heads on flies are ugly. I don't care. I want them to perform. I don't care about pretty conventions. Next step is the crystal flash, and don't be shy with it. We want this stuff to work. So I've got a good clump, find about the midpoint, and then just bring it underneath and up on top. Put a couple of wraps, fold over. Now let's discuss length a little bit. You see this thing is quite long, and I'll push it into the viewfinder here, into the frame I should say. You can see there's a lot there. If a fly is really long with steelhead, there's always a danger that they'll nip that long wing and miss the hook. So I'm going to shorten this up, and I do it by pushing it in like this and trimming when I push in, which creates a ragged end. I don't want the end of this to be squared off. So stuff is sticky. There we go. So now I have a ragged end to my flashaboo, and that way it'll flutter better and it looks a little bit more natural. It tends to have a little bit of a taper. The last step is the bucktail, and always use from the tip. And this is just really almost like a topping. You're not putting tons on. I'll get rid of the loose stuff, the short stuff, and you make this about the length of the flashaboo. I'll just take out a few of the long ones there. Okay, we'll just sit that on top. Then when you do a soft wrap, pull up, soft wrap, pull up. And once it's in place, you can bind it down. Now take the time to check to make sure it's square on the tube. Put in some wraps, and now cut at an angle like this. And what it does, it creates a taper for your bucktail. And if you've got some that are a little long, come in and trim them. Now hold on to that to make sure it doesn't move, and just come in and bind that all down. Now put some soft wraps at the back, and then come forward and finish it off. Here we double check it. That looks good. Okay, now we're going to put on some head cement. You could use UV glue. Use whatever you prefer. And just get a nice gloss finish on that. Okay, there's our B&C Thingy, ready to rock and roll. It's caught lots of steelhead for me in the past. I'll actually add a couple of pictures here towards the end. You can see what it's caught. And on a copper tube, it'll fish quite deep, or you could use a lighter tube if you want. But give it a try. It's a very effective steelhead pattern, and I've caught smallmouth bass on it as well. Black and chartreuse works for smallmouth, and it also works for walleye. I've caught all three species on it. So give it a try, the B&C Thingy. Cheers.